Welcome to the New Cyber Frontier, bringing you the latest news and initiatives that focus on the development of cybersecurity economics. You don't have to be a computer or cybersecurity expert to get plugged in. Your host brings it straightforward, asks the tough questions, and brings the cyber world to a level of understanding for everyone. You can find us on the web at www.newcyberfrontier.com. Now join our host as he introduces the topic for today's New Cyber Frontier.
Welcome to today's episode of New Cyber Frontier. On today, we have all three of the hosts, and we're in our series on Just talking about what we've heard for the last 8 years, what we hear you bringing to us, what we hear from talking to people out in the field. But welcome today, Tim, Shawn. Thanks for coming on.
You guys, how you doing?
I am doing great, and we are in the now and the present with these recordings, so they will be released shortly after we record them. Being as such, we have some current topics, and we were just talking about this before the show and getting a little bit excited about some of the points. But Shawn, why don't you kind of bring up what we're going to look at for a topic today?
So one of the things that happened earlier this week, unless you're living under a rock, the big FAA debacle earlier this week. The FAA made an announcement and grounded all flights in the United States for a while. So not all flights that were in there, but they wouldn't allow any flights to take off after what was supposedly reported as a corrupt database file. So, of course, that had an impact. The FAA says it wasn't affecting more than 1%. But anytime you ground the entire country from being able to fly, of course, that's going to be a big issue and a big discussion. So I think that's one of the things that we're talking about. And then what are the other implications associated?
Yeah. So. And without saying, sources and everything, we talked to a lot of people in the industry. Shawn, you had some information on, the ear to the ground, how this was or could have been or wasn't a cyber threat. Talk about what you know there.
Yeah, so I was first notified by Department of State. I do a lot of international travel, so I have a couple of alerts. I also have some colleagues that work in transportation, Department of Transportation, and then with the FAA and the FCC as well. So a lot of information was being passed around. They were trying to figure out exactly what was going on. Initially, it was reported that there was a corrupt database file. It was not a cyber attack. Now, here towards the end of the week, the report last night came out that it is believed that two contractors working for the FAA actually were doing something with the system. They still haven't determined whether it was accidental or intentional, but the change that they made was not scheduled, was not implemented correctly, and was the root cause of the disruption, therefore having to reboot the system, get everything back online, which leads into change management discussion, maybe business continuity, disaster recovery, go back to it's a cybersecurity framework issue with national critical infrastructure, transportation. When you ground all flights from being able to take off in the country, that's an issue. So which one of those issues do we want to tackle first?
So, that sounds like it started with the conversation, hey, look at what I have access to. How often have we heard that one?
Right. Yeah. Is it the right thing to do? The change? Was it the right time to do it? Did you go through a change management process? And, what level of access do you have to be able to do that unsupervised without, deconfliction, and what's the impact based on the risk associated with that change? Well, I think it's pretty big.
Yeah, and how often do we end up in this situation with our corporations?
Well, from a business perspective, we talk about risk management all the time. And having mature processes in place, you need to identify your most critical processes. Mean time to fail, mean time to repair. What's the maximum tolerable downtime before you're out of business? How long can you be unavailable with critical business flows for your employees or for retail or global company that provides services to your customers, how long can your customers be without your site before it impacts your bottom line?
Yeah, and you know what? Let's talk about this. We're going to go on a break here from our sponsors, but that information you just talked about comes from your employees, who some of them have this overreaching access that they might not even want to divulge or let you know they have. So you have to rely on them to tell you about something that would restrict themselves. So let's talk about having that conversation within the business. We'll be right back.
Blockframe technology offers next-generation blockchain managed trust and security. Unique non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bills of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequenced blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today by contacting Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier on our Just Talking series with Tim Montgomery, Shawn Murray, and myself, Christopher Gorog. Before the break, we talked about the FAA issue earlier this week, the grounding, and kind of the cause of that, and some access from contractors that were able to put something in without a process control. And before the break, I mentioned, hey, those same employees that have the access to do that are the ones setting up the processes or telling the management what process needed to be set up to control their own access. How do we start that conversation and get those people who might be unwilling to give up permission they have to start to regulate and take precautions against these type of problems? Tim.
Yeah, most of the time you go back to the configuration management process is like step maturity of that process. In my experiences working with different departments of the government, we usually have a very mature process. A lot of individuals who had to buy off on it. On top of that, there's a lot of regulated tiering inside access. So you got like the least privilege access. You got a separation of duty type concepts that all apply to the privileges that administrative, if you do a task administratively, they would apply here. So those policies should be in place and reviewed annually, 2 times a year, 3 times a year, whatever it takes. And I'm sure this after action report for the FAA is going to entail some of those factors. And the configuration management is supposed to be bought off. So as an engineer, system engineer, oftentimes we would have to go through a lengthy process and have a contingency for things that would occur in the middle, even if they bought off on maintenance windows to do such a thing. So you'd have a backup plan somehow. I mean, there are gotchas, there's exceptions, things of that nature, but this would be thought out multiple individual groups that would buy off on the concept of being able to do such a thing and what the impacts are and how to regain and recover from that. So
yeah, I think one of the things though
that seems like failures in this case.
Yeah, one of the things in there though is that sounds like a mature organization, and you're just talked about that in the government, some mature organizations. I remember as a young developer, and I'll kind of get myself in a little bit of trouble here, but I remember looking through. We were connecting to databases to do our testing and our development, and there was a couple of databases at the company that were just out there. So I tried to log on to them with my tool and left the password blank, and it logged in. And I thought it was really funny because I was sitting there going through the accounting database. I'm like, oh, so this guy makes this much, this guy makes this much. But I told on myself and said, hey, this is open, this should be taken care of. But I like this access, I don't want to tell anybody because it'll go away, could have also been my approach.
Yes, but now we're talking about other principles like need to know and least privilege, right? So I only get access to the system at the level that I need to be able to do my job and know more. And then the data itself, the information that may be sensitive in nature, simple policies such as a non-disclosure agreement in the event that you do get access to sensitive information that you shouldn't have, right? So, but least privilege says, I only get access to what I need to be able to do my job. Well, the same applies to the information. Just because I have a top secret clearance doesn't mean I get access to all the top secret information. I only get access to what I need to be able to do my job. Anything outside of that should be true.
Yeah, and usually in cybersecurity, there's logging methods, and we review those typically monthly.
Mm-hmm.
So password control policies that should be in place. We do know that there's mishaps. However, those policies should be in place to catch such things, and reviews should be controlled that are continuous monitoring methods. So
yeah, I kind of go back to, I was with a younger company that didn't have those in effect, and I've seen that even with more mature private sector companies where they really rely on the employees to give them that information, to have access and to restrict themselves. Seems like there's a almost a conundrum there with, what is the difference between really tight controls and tight bureaucracy and the problem we had today or this week.
Yeah, if you look at, the federal government, all federal agencies are required to follow NIST, RMF, so the Risk Management Framework Certification Accreditation Process. I can't imagine that this NOTAM system was not required to be certified and accredited. And one of the biggest control categories that we have under RMF is identity and access management, access control. So levels of access did the two admins have, and change management is another major category under 853, the controls digest associated with RMF. What level of access did they have, and then what was the change management process for what I would consider to be a critical system? And what are the checklists that we go through? Is it a ticketing system? Back to Tim's point, what are the stakeholders who got to be notified and give input? And did we test the change in a trusted environment before we implemented it on the live operational, critical system? Those are all questions that I think need to be answered, and I think that this is a really good case study for us in a cyber industry to reflect back on and say, hey, this is what happened, this is what should be implemented, and then use that not just in regular business but for the government as well.
Yeah. It would definitely be a good case study. Let's see what comes out of that.
Yeah, it sounds like, there could be a couple things. Could be that this particular parameter wasn't identified as critical, or it could be that the procedure wasn't followed, or a control didn't work. I think we don't have enough information to know for this particular case, but definitely that's the level of importance of this system warranted a little bit tighter controls than probably they had.
You would think, that this system would have had those, like you said, the RMF controls, and pretty tight. Whatever the fits category that this thing had at least have 400 plus controls that had to cover.
Well, and then it goes back to, did they actually follow the procedures that were in place? They may have gone to the board. They may have gone through all the regulation required. I reflect back on a similar situation in a previous contract that I was on with the federal government, where we actually had, we were decommissioning a satellite program, and we were dispositioning a lot of the equipment that was in the rack, but not everything in that cabinet was being decommissioned. And because of that, not everybody had a need to know of what the things that weren't being decommissioned were, because they were providing sensitive capabilities for other government agencies. But I went to the government lead and said, hey, we should probably have a change procedure specifically for how we're going to decommission and disposition these assets in that cabinet. And he agreed. And so I got some pushback from the program manager. We don't have time to develop procedures just for this. We do this stuff all the time. And so the government said, you're going to do it anyway in the risk management meeting in the CCB, the Change Configuration Board. And so fast forward 2 weeks, I get an emergency phone call from the network administrator saying you need to come in here. When I got into the data center, the two admins did not follow the procedures. They took a pair of scissors and cut through all the fiber optics in the top of the cabinet, loosened all the bolts, and their strategy was to take the entire cabinet down the elevator to the loading dock and disposition the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. You know,
So they severed critical communications to several different federal agencies because they didn't follow the procedures that they were required to. And we specifically identified the risk to make sure that they did that. And then they didn't follow those procedures.
Yeah.
It
sounds like in that case, and maybe even this case with the FAA, that they have too many critical systems that either aren't redundant or too close, and they can all be shut down at the same time, or on this, they don't have that division for redundancy in place.
Well, and then there's an indication that it may not be the oversight, may not be the government. Looks like a couple of contractors are maintaining that critical system. So where's the oversight on behalf of the government? Who's the cyber security, the ISO, the ISSM that's oversight over that system as well?
Yeah. Let's take a break and hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back. We want to continue this conversation.
Blockframe Technology offers next-generation blockchain-managed trust and security. Unique non-fungible tokens are used to secure software bills of materials to provide data quality and security for every transaction in your supply chain. Deploy advanced peer-to-peer product security, scale zero trust capability to millions of IoT devices, allow vendor tracking and accountability, and rapidly reset from compromise. Unchangeable, time-sequenced blockchain data provides next-generation security using machine learning trust algorithms and audit analytics. Start securing your supply chain today by contacting Blockframe at www.blockframetech.com.
Welcome back to New Cyber Frontier on our Just Talking series. Tim Montgomery, Shawn Murray, and myself, Christopher Gorog. Before the break, we were talking about business continuity and redundancy. Tim, I think you were about to contribute, but I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay. Well, in this, and we're talking about the FAA's case here, in many cases, and many agencies too, their systems, as they start out legacy and merging and infrastructure changes throughout a few decades now, at least from my experiences, you don't oftentimes see a factor of redundancy. We do talk about the cost efficiencies of use of taxpayers' dollars. That becomes a very prominent factor when it comes to reproducing the same system twice. So the idea of redundancy becomes very costly. But certain specific agencies have the ability to not only do that now with Cloud Factor, being on-premise or off-premise. It's how can we get there from here if there's no redundancy? Redundancy is an important piece, I think, especially in this FAA case. If there was, especially this specific system that had to be shut down and rebooted, you would think that they would actually have something in place, because this one is very important for all of traffic, for all the flight, it looks like, because we see the result of it shutting down and not being able to come back up like it should have effectively. So it makes you wonder why this idea of redundancy, maybe it's being played in, maybe it's not there yet, maybe there's a plan, but it's very important, I think, in this case for the FAA to actually look and examine this that way.
Yeah. So maybe, a couple of years ago, these type of systems didn't exist. It's new things that have been slid in, the openness of information, to maybe it's something just not identified, slipped through the cracks, and the first time it's ever happened, first time it's ever came up.
It's true. I do know that in agencies across the board, though, and I'm sure Shawn will agree, that this is an ongoing, consistent factor in system building for every agency, every company, every corporation, anyone doing IT business, and understanding the ramifications of the requirement of availability, right? In CIA through that.
Yeah, availability. And then we kind of, before the show, we were talking about, the availability of information in the aviation sector, and the open responders, and the ability to track planes. We could do this as a public, but it sounds like the systems that they're using where can be shut down, but the public ones are open. What do you think about that balance? Anybody, Shawn? I know you downloaded it, but there's an app called Flight Radar 24.
Yeah, it's funny. We were talking about this, and we were looking at the privacy implications, and then what are the intelligence implications of an application like this? But my daughter actually is flying in, and I was able to actually zoom in on the airport, and I was able to, based on how many airplanes are in the terminal where I know she would be, I basically put my finger on that aircraft, and there it came up. There's my daughter's flight. I can do a 3D representation of the aircraft, and this thing is constantly refreshing, showing me all of the flights that are happening and where they're located. I mean, the intelligence aspect of it, from all of us being former military and working from the government, I mean, this is the kind of stuff you're trained on about, OPSEC, right? And, how to share information, how to use that information. It's pretty cool if you're using the app just to track, your loved ones or your aircraft that are coming in. But what if you're the terrorist that knows that the other person that's on the other terrorist you're communicating with needs to show up 10 minutes later because the flight's delayed, that is the target that they're going after, or other various things that might be happening.
I was sitting in a restaurant whenever the news came up that the flights were grounded, and somebody opened up this app and said, "Oh yeah, but there's a couple planes still flying over wherever in Nebraska and stuff." And I was like, "What are you looking at?" Couldn't believe that this thing existed.
Yeah, I didn't even know about it, and it's not till you have a conversation with somebody and you learn just different things. That's why our industry is so great. I mean, if I had to do the same thing every single day, I'd be bored out of my mind. But we change every single day.
Yeah,
so many facets to the industry. It's unbelievable. Never ending.
It really just seems like, I mean, when I see that information that you're talking about, that there should be some more restriction from just anybody having access to that.
The question I got is, how do you get access to the transponders on aircraft, and why is that something that the public should have access to?
Yeah, why is it publicly available at all for an app to go reach out to? That would be my big question. I think there's a massive factor in there that needs to be addressed.
Yeah. Well, apparently they, and the same conversation I had with the person said, "Oh yeah, somebody has been tracking Elon Musk and posting on Twitter everywhere that his plane landed." And it was actually one of the reasons why he was going after Twitter to buy it or something, because he wanted to shut this guy down. And he did when he first bought Twitter, and then political changes, he turned it back on and everything because he thought, hey, I don't want to be known as censoring as soon as I buy something. But it was very upsetting enough to him to, it's a problem,
It's being used for some purpose that could create something for someone that would be a problem, So we all know that fluent information is a great thing in today's society. However, when it evolves into being used for malice or activities that would harm someone else, which sounds like this is what it's alluding to, then that's where cybersecurity professionals have to step in and figure out what to do to create preventiveness, if not downright stop it, because it becomes a crime. And that's a violation of privacy too, right? That's a big factor.
It's funny because I think that we haven't defined what a violation of privacy is. We've defined what the requirements for data storage and the privacy around data records are, and that's what GDPR and California Consumer Privacy does. But your rights to privacy in digitally, very undefined anywhere. And as Shawn was saying, that go ahead, Shawn.
Talked about last time was your biometrics information and data.
Mm-hmm. What you were saying about the intelligence industry kind of being at odds because they want this to be available, But yet, why should individual citizens or consumers have access to intelligence information? Where's that border?
Yeah, when it comes to intelligence, especially in the United States, the laws are different. When we talk about intelligence information, we're not, intelligence in the United States, intelligence agencies and counterintelligence agencies are not allowed to collect on U.S. citizens unless there's a nexus with a foreign entity. And so that's very cut and dry. But when you're talking outside of the country and you're collecting information, take a look at, the Snowden breach, right? He identified several tools that our intelligence agencies were using to collect data on citizens all over the world. And people were like, oh, in the EU, President Merkel out of Germany, for example, was one of the high prominent people that were being tracked. And so everybody's pressing, well, you have to comply with GDPR. No, they don't. They're an intelligence agency. Everybody collects on everybody. We just got caught because somebody got in there and disclosed the tools that we were using. But we're not the country that does it. It happens all the time. But we as regular citizens don't fall under the intelligence laws. So as a company, as an individual, or as a nonprofit organization, what are our responsibilities with these types of applications and this type of information?
Yeah, and I've heard a couple times said, and I think I'm kind of in agreement with this, that we need a kind of a Magna Carta type of agreement. And maybe it's something that the UN looks at that says, what are the rights? What are the responsibilities? What are the limitations of power? What are the rights of the citizen? It's just something that we haven't come to the progression point that we've done yet.
Yeah, there's also a trade-off that needs to be evaluated between the consumer, the private citizen, and the technology that they use. Oftentimes, they willingly give away their information or their privacy just by clicking on an app, or not even reading what the agreement is, and you just want access to the app. You just want access to the website. So what are you giving away with your own consent?
Yeah, I guess I would ask, you just downloaded and installed that Flight Radar 24 app. What was the privacy statement on that?
Yeah, so they do have a privacy statement. I have not created an account. I have not transitioned any data into the app itself. But if I want access to additional features, I will have to agree to that, the privacy in the data collections, the metadata, the statistics, and the looking at it here. Yeah, I'll have to agree to be able to get access to those additional. So additional features include satellite view, hybrid view, changing the different logos representing aircraft and airplanes, but the additional features require me to accept that agreement.
But they already got an IP address and a location through your provider network. Tim, I know you opened it up on the computer, right?
Yeah.
So they've already got an IP address of where it came from. I mean, the amount of information they collect on anybody, and if you hear this on the show and pop over and start looking at it, now they have a wider preference or sampling of data coming in.
Yeah, as an individual, I can access a site off the same type of app he's got on his phone on the internet here on my computer. I'm just collecting data from the access points that we are trying to gain information from that site. And then, of course, you're talking about user accounts. I didn't have to do that, and I didn't have to click on anything there that knew that I was going to give up information at all. So it's not at least warning me and asking me to provide something that I consent to. I mean, those are two factors there. So as a user, as I log in, I can see giving up my data being collected from, and then I have to really, like a ULA type of, or EULA type of, agreement that I have, like Microsoft has for its licensing. Those are two factors. From the perspective of the individuals on those planes, though, they didn't agree to anything, and you're getting data about their movements right now in real time.
Yeah, and what rights do they have to that?
Yeah, what rights do they have? So, I mean, you're talking about three different perspectives here when it comes to privacy, right?
Yeah. And what country was that in, Shawn? I think you looked at that, right?
It was, would you say, Tim, I think it was Sweden?
Yeah, it was Sweden. The company was in Sweden. The original app was created from a Swedish company. So, I mean, I just question the understanding of privacy when it comes with the type of app using these type of resources. I mean, we've touched on several different factors here, I think, and it's just worth examining how this is possible and what it actually is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I chair digital privacy for IEEE. We look at these type of things, but I mean, it's been a year of looking at it and gathering people, and everybody comes in with, well, let's look at this. What's somebody already doing? We can't seem to get ahead of it. It's something and that's why I said kind of defining what the Magna Carta is, what the requirements are for all the players involved, seems to be a first step, because right now we're just chasing our tail. We're analyzing one app and saying, well, what are they doing? What have we already got tracking us? What information are we already giving up? Now let's decide whether we like that or not. We kind of got to get ahead of that game.
I will tell you, there was a couple of years ago, I was at a conference and I was watching a presentation from one of the big dog telecommunications providers. I won't say which one, but it's a Verizon, Sprint, AT&T, T-Mobile type company that was providing real-time information and sharing data regarding cell phones, that each cell phone, every mobile device that's connected through a cellular network has a unique ID associated with it for broadcasting. So if you think about when law enforcement is doing investigations, if they're investigating somebody in their cell phone, what cell tower did they hit? What time stamps do they have? And what they were showing was they actually have, we also provide services for VIPs within the federal government and other governments. And they were literally showing where secret agents were, or secret service agents were located on a visit to Mexico. They were showing regular users, they were showing government users, they were showing emergency workers, and where these people were in real time. So, we're talking about the FAA, but what about the telecommunications? There's a lot more devices than there are aircraft, being broadcast right now.
Yeah. We're kind of reaching the end of our time, but I think we touched on something here that is near and dear to me, at least, is that, something needs to be done to try to get ahead of this discussion. What are the positive objectives, parameters, frameworks, Magna Carta that we need to set up that says, what's acceptable use policy almost for the citizen in the digital age. Kind of end with that, unless you guys have any last minute closing thoughts.
We could go on about this forever. So.
Yeah, I think it's a big issue going on there. So I'm good. So thank you.
All right. Well, we'll see you on another show. Thanks for joining today. As always, reach out to us. Send us your thoughts for people you want to have on with us, for topics, and for how we can elaborate, how we can impact the industry. What can we help drive forward? We're always open. Thanks a lot for joining today.
Thanks, everybody.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of New Cyber Frontier. Remember to get involved. Often we think that someone else will handle privacy and security in the virtual world, but you are the only one truly in command of your virtual fate. Join our mailing list so we can keep you informed of breaking news and new releases. If you have an idea, if you have a question that you would like to hear answered, or if you want to get involved with our efforts, reach out to us at NewCyberFrontier.com. We also encourage you to visit our sponsors' links, as they are the ones that really make this show possible. I want to thank each of you for supporting the show, and we look forward to seeing you back for the next episode of New Cyber Frontier.